Okay, we're on to our second story of courage for today. We'll call Michelle Krinsky up in just a second. She's here from Ohio. So every year during the flu season, many medical personnel, hospital staff, and educators are faced with a choice. Get the flu shot or get fired. Michelle Krinsky knows about that. Michelle Krinsky is a registered nurse in the state of Ohio with an expertise in neonatal nursing. Her position of 29 years in a special care nursery was terminated for refusing to take the flu vaccine. No exemptions were allowed in her unit. Michelle is here to share her story of courage. Please welcome Michelle Krinsky.
Hello everyone, thank you very much for that warm welcome. And I just want to say it's been a privilege and an honor to be here the past couple of days, sharing this space with everyone. So much wisdom, so much knowledge, and I've learned so much just by observing and being a part of the Congress. So thank you, Roseanne, for the invitation. I've really enjoyed it. A little bit of history. I've been a registered nurse for 36 years. The beginning of my career, I worked in the intensive care unit, pediatric intensive care unit of Cincinnati Children's Hospital. In the past 29 years, I've worked in a level 2 special care nursery at a large hospital in Cincinnati. Until 8 years ago, the flu vaccine was always optional. I always chose to decline it because I've always been a very healthy person. I never felt any need to take it. I have never had the flu, never had anything like the flu, so I would decline that every year. Like I said, 8 years ago, it did become mandatory at our hospital. Myself, like most of the employees at the hospital, I lined up, I took the shot. I figured that in order for the hospital to make the flu vaccine mandatory, there must be a good reason for it, that they were thinking about patient safety. Little did I know at that time that it had more to do with government bureaucracy and quality markers than it ever had anything to do with patient safety. So my journey into vaccine research started about 3 years ago. My father was diagnosed with dementia and he was rapidly declining. And I started reading a lot of articles about brain-related health issues and the potential reasons for developing dementia. My grandfather had already also passed away from dementia, so there was a strong genetic link in our family, and I wanted to learn as much as I could about that. So when I started reading articles about dementia, the studies that stood out to me were the studies about mercury and aluminum and their neurotoxicity. Those studies took me to vaccine research because, of course, vaccines also contain heavy metals. So it was just interesting how starting to look into brain issues in dementia led me to vaccine research. I was intrigued by all the research, what I was finding about the heavy metals in the vaccines. And of course, at the time, and still today, there's mercury in the flu vaccine in the multi-dose vials. And I started reading about that, and of course, that caused me a lot of concern. I did read one study by Hugh Fudenberg that stated if you take a flu shot with mercury 5 years in a row, you would be at a 10 times greater risk for developing dementia. At the time, I was like, oh my gosh, I've already had 6 flu shots in a row, going on year 7. And that information just kind of floored me and led me to further research on the flu vaccine. Up until that point in time, I really had very little knowledge on vaccines. I was, in the healthcare profession. I was a nurse in the special care nursery. Unfortunately, I was vaccinating babies with little knowledge, along with the rest of my coworkers and the physicians I worked with. I know so much more now since this experience has happened to me, especially related to the Hep B vaccine that we use on a routine basis on babies in special care nursery. So this has all spurred me to further research and to help inform and educate my coworkers and others that remain in that field of nursing. So about the same time I was doing all this research on dementia, looking into the flu vaccine, looking at the heavy metal issues, I also had another change in lifestyle for myself, and this all happened about the same time. I've had a lifelong passion and love for animals and a lifetime of animal advocacy. And this led me to adopt the tenets of ahimsa, or non-harm. Non-harm to other sentient beings, and also a life of non-harm or non-injury to self. I had been vegetarian most of my life, but with my increasing awareness of the horrors of industrialized farming, I decided to become vegan. I began eating an organic plant-based diet and eliminated all toxins from my diet and my environment to the best of my knowledge. So the ethics of the vaccine production weighed heavily on my mind, as did the potential risk involved with the ingredients, the toxic ingredients that were contained in the flu shot, and the lack of safety studies that were done on the ingredients. I had also experienced a localized reaction the year prior in my arm. So the year prior that I took the flu shot, I had a large swollen area. It was very painful, and it lasted for about 6 weeks. Nothing bad enough that I went to a doctor and it did subside, but it did cause me some concern at the time. So between my concerns over the ethics of production, my beliefs of non-harm, and my previous adverse reaction, when the flu season of 2016-2017 came around, I filed the appropriate paperwork to decline the flu shot, and I basically filed a conscientious exemption. That paperwork was filed in October, at the beginning of the flu season. I was allowed to work through October, November, and December, and into January, without ever being asked to wear a mask, which is our hospital's policy. If you exempt from the flu shot, you have to mask the rest of the season. No one ever came to me and asked me to wear a mask. I just worked like I had throughout the year. Mid-January, I was called to a meeting a half an hour before I was scheduled to work, asked to come to work early so we could discuss the flu vaccine. I was greeted by my manager, another manager from the family unit, the associate director of nursing, and a representative of human resources. I was told in that meeting that over the winter they had changed the flu vaccine policy, and that the OB area that I worked in had become non-exempt. And I was given 2 weeks at that time to either decide to comply with the flu shot or my position would be terminated. I asked at the time if I could take an unpaid leave of absence, because that was mid-January, so we only had about 6 weeks left of flu season. And I was more than willing to stay home unpaid, so I didn't have to take the shot. That offer was declined. And it was kind of funny because the associate director of nursing told me that I couldn't take a leave of absence because I wouldn't be able to come back to the nursery because I would still be shedding the flu virus. Which was completely illogical, but that was the end of that discussion. We discussed masking options in that meeting. Because at the time they had talked about the N95 mask being a little more effective, filtering particles, which I know filtering viruses, it's really not, but since they still make people mask to exempt the flu shot, I said, can I mask? Can I double mask? Can I wear a special mask? Is there any way we can get around this. Again, that was denied. They said masking was no longer an option. So if I wanted to work in the OB area in the job that I loved, it was basically get the shot or your position will be terminated. The meeting was fairly abrupt, and I left feeling fairly dazed, very upset, shocked that I was actually potentially going to be fired for not complying with an injection that I was against. And at that time, I was completely unaware of my rights. The whole vaccine issue was new to me. I was just acting on, my prior adverse reaction, my newfound beliefs of non-harm, the safety issues of the vaccine. So all these, it was fairly new because they brought up that I had taken, well, you took the shot 6 years in a row. Well, can't we evolve? Can't our ideas, our practices, our thoughts, our beliefs change year to year? Yes, I did take it 6 years in a row, but I feel differently now, and I would like to not have to take it. So I left that meeting, like I said, very upset. I have been a dedicated employee at that hospital with a good work record, a healthy person that never called in sick. I love my job, dedicated to the babies I took care of, enjoyed working with the families, teaching. We attended all the high-risk deliveries, actually attended all the deliveries in labor delivery, and then our staff also took care of all the sick, premature and sick babies in the nursery. So I really enjoyed, obviously I was there for 29 years, I enjoyed what I was doing. And I was kind of felt sick about the possibility of losing my job. And financially, I wasn't at the point in my life that I was, I could lose my job. I was planning on retiring from this hospital, and I was saving money in my retirement fund. So I felt like they just kind of had me. I didn't want to lose my job. I was against the shot, but I did go ahead and take it. So I made an appointment with the employee health nurse, and of course when I went there, I had all kind of questions for her that she had absolutely no answers for, none. And I asked for the vaccine insert, which I took home and highlighted and studied, but I did take the shot. So I took the shot on a Friday, knowing that the following week I would be on vacation, and also knowing that previous years that I took the flu vaccine, I felt a little yucky, not horribly ill, but just a little sick, as most of my coworkers also would get a little sick after it. And actually a lot of my coworkers ended up getting respiratory infections the same week they would get their flu shot. But I took the flu shot, and on day 5, the week I was on vacation, I woke up with 102 fever, horrible body aches, chills, could barely get out of bed, just felt horrible. Basically felt like I had the flu or very flu-like symptoms. And that went into bronchitis and laryngitis. And I was sick for 2 weeks. So that 2-week period, I was sick all through my vacation. I was sick the following week that I had to call in sick to work. And I was mad at myself that I took the shot. I was mad that the hospital can actually take away your gut feeling and your intuition of something that you don't want to do. Something that you just feel like it's not right, and that something may happen if you take it. They take that away from you and basically just offer coerced choice. It's, when they say take the shot or you lose your job, it doesn't give you a whole lot to work with. So I was sort of upset with myself that I had gone along with it. But after being so sick with that flu shot, I decided that that would be the last time I would take the flu vaccine. The months came and went, so that was the end of January 2017. So the months came and went, and before I knew it, the flu clinics began again for the next flu season, which was October of 2017. So I just had a shot in January. Then I had to take the shot again the following fall. So the closer it got, I started dreading, you know, and thinking, okay, so I know what happened last year, what am I going to do? And I threw myself into, again, just studying, researching, trying to become as knowledgeable as I could about the flu vaccine. And there were a couple of different staff meetings that we had. Our director of nursing, along with my manager, and some of the other nursing administration, some meetings they were at, I brought up my concerns again about the flu shot. I had with me the highlighted insert from the flu vaccine. And of course, I asked them, nursing administration, my manager, have you guys ever looked at a flu vaccine insert? Of course, just blank looks from all of them. No one had ever looked at a flu vaccine insert. No one was aware of the ingredients. They, like myself, previously thought it was a little flu antigen and flu virus antigen and some saline. And most people think it's no big deal. You know, what's the big deal about a flu shot? They don't realize the other ingredients, a long list of other potentially toxic ingredients that are in that shot. So I asked them, questioned them about different things on the insert. I asked them if they were aware of the different risks. Basically just talked and went over again my concerns. They were completely unaware, and at those meetings they just told me it was a condition of my employment, and not much discussion. It was just, again, you have to take it. So on November 16th of 2017, I scheduled a meeting with my manager to discuss the flu vaccine and my decision. I had even provided her with all the research I had done, which is kind of silly looking back because I don't think she looked at most of it, but I had a stack of articles I printed out, safety issues, the risks, the ingredients, long-term, short-term effects, just a lot of different research. And I also put together a short video, which it was such an honor to meet Dr. Geyer, because Dr. Geyer was in my video. He was the beginning of my video that I made about the flu vaccine, along with Dr. Suzanne Humphreys and Dr. Tim Penny and Dr. Moss. It was the different doctors that had done a lot of vaccine research, and I had found them in their statements about the flu vaccine, you know, on YouTube, on the internet, and I put a short video together for my manager to watch. I wanted her to see that, you know, I wasn't a crazy person trying to cause trouble, that I had legitimate concerns, and my beliefs and the lifestyle I was living truly was, you know, this flu shot did not coincide with how I was living, and I truly was concerned. Questions about any of that, or about the EEOC, or anything, I'd be willing to answer any questions. Yes?
I have,
the mic
has to do with, did you not have a union of nurses at the facility in which you work? Because it is that national organization, National Nurses United, and you can bring complaints to the union as well. Well, I'm sorry.
Yes, our hospital did not have a union, so that was not an option.
Okay. So we also need to, I guess, address the fact that it's pretty important for most employees to have unions.
Exactly. And also just to be aware, which I hope with me going through this, everyone's aware that we do have the right to file an exemption, a religious exemption. Our unit put out a blanket policy that no one could even file an exemption. So it wasn't the fact that I filed an exemption, it was declined. The following, that year, they said no one could even file. And the EEOC did have issues with the hospital putting out that blanket statement, because everyone has the right to file a religious exemption. And that's what's being investigated right now.
I'm interested in the bill that you talked about in Ohio. We had one very briefly presented here in Minnesota. Basically the same thing, that an employer cannot terminate you for refusing a shot. So I'm wondering if we could maybe collaborate on
So
that.
the best people that can tell you about that are my friends from Ohio Advocates. Yeah, talking about House Bill 193. Could Donna get a microphone?
Mike, I'm pretty loud anyway sometimes, but and I can, Ohio House Bill 193, its first iteration was in 2015 as Ohio House Bill 170, and it was killed in committee. It kind of died there with, I think, a sponsor, proponent, and opponent testimony, and then no vote. And then the chair of the committee, after a lot of pressure, decided to take it to vote. It was in the same committee this past year, and it passed. And so it passed with amendments, though, and that's been a controversial thing in Ohio. The amendments said that the employer could take reasonable measures, which pretty much said that we know that's going to be masking, which is, scientifically unproven anyway, or you would have to mask every employee, so it doesn't, and even in visitors who came into the hospital. So it's still there, it still sets the basis, we still hope it passes, but the Speaker of the House last fall then said, this thing hasn't been given enough time in committee, so in a very irregular move, he put it into the Health Committee, which is chaired by a doctor, and his intention is to kill it. So I'm not sure, do you have anything to add on updates with it's not, we're doing what we can still, we're still pushing and adding pressure, and we've opened up a lot of eyes, if nothing else, with this bill. The one thing I did want to address about the previous question about unions is that there is the Ohio Nurses Association, which is a union, a state union of nurses. They actually have a statement on their website that says that the flu shot is recommended, that shouldn't ever be a requirement, but they absolutely will not support us in this effort. They will not go against the Ohio Health, Hospital Association, the other big organizations. The other thing is that sometimes in some hospitals, ONA nurses can magically get exemptions, but not have to wear masks. But the other nurses who get regular exemptions have to be masked, or they don't even get exemptions. So the union's a little bit of a tricky issue there, but we definitely do think more employees need to stand up for their rights. They've got to do it, or it's not going to get better. So.
Thank you, Donna. And that was my point too. If the unit I worked in was fairly small, 25 to 30 employees, and many of my coworkers had the same concerns I did, but of course were afraid to lose their jobs. Many of them were younger, they supported their families, they needed health insurance. And I tried to tell them at the time, if half of our unit stood up to this, they're not going to fire everybody. They're going to have to come up with some different conclusions to this. But unfortunately, I was the only person that decided to take a stand. The rest of them went ahead and complied. Two of my coworkers, actually one has an autoimmune disorder, was forced to take the shot. The other one had a previous flu shot injury, and she was also forced to take the shot. So even the medical exemptions and the letters from the doctors didn't matter at the hospital. They were, determined to get that 100% compliance. Yes?
Did you ever dig to find out where the incentivizing of the 100% compliance enough? We know where it comes from, but were you able to document?
So I have a good idea, again, from my friends from Ohio Advocates and Ohio Health Freedom. I've learned a lot. They are the knowledgeable ones on the vaccines and what I've learned about reimbursements and penalties. Do you want to address that, Donna or Michelle?
So this is all coming from Healthy People 2020. So it's a nationwide push, and while it was just a recommendation that hospitals get up to 95% vaccination compliance rate with their employees, it's not based on reimbursement. But then they went a step further and added it to the hospital star rating system. So it is now a multiplier in their reimbursement rate. So if they don't get a certain percentage of their employees vaccinated, they compare them to hospitals around them in the area and also nationwide, and then they retract their points, based on their vaccination rate, and then that will subtract from their reimbursement. But I really do think that if the hospital is depending on their employee vaccination rate in order to get their star rating system up, they have other major problems that are going on. So Maine actually has one of the most liberal vaccination laws, and it doesn't even cover the flu shot. It's all of the vaccines that they have exemptions written in their law, philosophical, religious, and medical. And they're not having problems with their star ratings. They're not having problems with compliance. Most people will voluntarily accept the flu shot. So really this is just an attack on people, the minority of the population, who are declining the vaccine. So to answer the question, it's stemming from Healthy People 2020 and a federal recommendation.
And federal grants that come based on your...
Yeah, so it's CMS, Centers for Medicaid and Medicare reimbursement, and tied to their star rating system. So you can go into the hospital compare on the CMS website and actually see where that multiplier is, and we have all the documents compiled. So I guess if anybody wants to look at sponsoring legislation like this, you know, feel free to email Ohio Advocates for Medical Freedom. That email is what? info@ohioamf.org, and they can collaborate with the different freedom groups in the different states, so see if we can't get a nationwide push on this. At any rate, even if you get your bill introduced and you get conversation on that, it's an opportunity to educate. Not only does it get you in the committee hearings educating, but it gives you reason to visit your legislators to educate them on these topics. Many of them are completely unaware of what's going on. They're unaware of the interference that's occurring between even doctor-patient relationships. So they are appalled when they hear that even medical exemptions are being declined by these hospital review boards. So if we don't introduce these bills, we don't have an opportunity to educate, we don't have a reason to be there. So even if you're not making progress, you're making progress by having that conversation.
Any other questions?
Yes. What has the media coverage of your situation been like?
So right after I was terminated, and actually it wasn't because of myself, but another fairly outspoken person that lived in the same area who was a flu shot victim, Lisa, I think it was 11 or 12 years ago, took a flu shot and ended up paralyzed and in the ICU. And actually it was at the same hospital that I was terminated from. But she was diagnosed, it was like a Guillain-Barré syndrome. I think it was what acute transverse myelitis maybe was the actual diagnosis, but paralyzed, and that was 12 years ago, and she still has residual damage from that. So she's a very outspoken advocate, and she is heads up the local Vax group in Cincinnati, which is how I met my friends from Ohio Advocates for Medical Freedom, because when I was terminated, I truly had no idea what to do. It was totally new to me. I didn't know my rights. I didn't know if I should see an attorney. I didn't know what to do. So another person from the hospital told me about this vaccine group that my friend who had been vaccine injured headed up. So I contacted her. She's very vocal, very outspoken. She does a great job. And she actually called one of the news stations and thought they'd be interested that a nurse was fired, a local nurse was fired for this reason. So I said, will you please do the interview with me? And she did. So we got one news story, and then the following day, because the other news stations saw that local media coverage, I got a call at 9 o'clock the next morning from a different news station saying, we're on our way, we'll be at your driveway in 10 minutes to interview you. I'm in my pajamas, like feeding all my dogs. I said, please don't show up in my driveway in 10 minutes. Yeah, I'll do an interview if we can make it a little bit later in the afternoon. So I called Lisa, and the two of us, again, did that interview for a different news station. That interview went a little better. They were more receptive. The journalist who did that did a much better interview. And then I have been on a couple radio shows. Michelle's been on, was it two different radio shows with Lisa, the Guillain-Barré survivor, myself, and Michelle Cotterman. We've done a few radio shows, and I think that's it. So it was right after I was terminated. They seemed interested in that story, but things have kind of died down since then.
One more question.
Yes.
You mentioned that you worked in a special needs nursery and were administering Hep B vaccines to newborns, I'm assuming preemies, some of them maybe not so healthy. Did you have any experience with parents asking to decline those vaccines?
Yes.
Was the hospital and the doctors receptive to that? What happened? We're hearing reports about people being referred to Child Protective Services, and just wondered what your experience was.
So I have a whole new perspective, obviously, on all vaccines in general, and I, looking back to my 29 years of vaccinating infants brings me much concern, and I think about it a lot. But as I tell people all the time, you don't know what you don't know. And the healthcare workers, we truly, as nurses, I'm speaking for myself and most of my other coworkers, we were not educated on vaccines in nursing school. I truly believe most of the physicians, I know the physicians I worked with aren't truly educated on vaccines. They follow the recommended schedule. And for us in the nursery, in the special care nursery, Hep B was the vaccine we would give. It was part of a standing order. We would attend deliveries, we would go back, and babies would get their vitamin K and they would get their Hep B vaccine. Now, we always gave parents an information sheet. I would not consider it true informed consent because these mothers just had babies, and the last thing they really cared about was going over a vaccine paper. But at our hospital, it was never pushed. It was offered, it was given, it was part of the standing orders, but if a parent came in with vaccine knowledge and said, I choose not to have that vaccine, fine, that's great. It was never pushed. And obviously, as I learned more about vaccines and I started doing my research on the Hep B vaccine, the last month of my employment, I would make sure that I had that discussion with the parents. I would make sure they were aware. I would tell them to do more research and talk to their doctors a little more in depth about it. I truly did not want to vaccinate another baby, and I can pretty much say I'll never vaccinate another baby. Because right now I have a lot of questions and a lot of concerns. So that's part of my goal right now, is to help inform and educate other people in the healthcare industry, to make them aware of these concerns so that they can look into it a little deeper like I have and realize that there's a whole other world out there besides the little bubble we were in the hospital, administering medications without a whole lot of thought just because it was an order, and that there are vaccine-injured babies, vaccine-injured children, vaccine-injured adults, and we need to be more aware and informed.
I have a question. A minute or not? Judy gets to break the rules.
So the organization Nurses Against Mandatory Vaccinations, is that still active, or are they out there educating nurses? Or?
I believe it is. I mean, I looked into all those groups when I was first terminated.
They were down for a while, but they restarted. I don't know if they're in full. They were attacked quite a bit. Like the mainstream medicine went after anyone involved in that organization, and they were attacked quite a bit. But I know that they restarted. I don't know how. I think they might be more low-key now. They're not going to go as strong, unfortunately.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.